important. No, the student can help us actually to write. They can help us to write, to develop papers. They can. Sometimes the project work they write, if you supervise and you help them to write well, you see that you can get a lot of things from the papers they write. That's inclusive. And it is when you have open-mindedness that you are able to do this. Right. Then it also helps you to be objective. Objectivity. So that you are not subjective, you are not always this is my own. But to be objective. To be objective, you have already said it, to be factual. Base the thing on what is already out there. And then it helps you to observe well. To observe well. So that when your observation is wrong, and indeed, in critical thinking, observation, though a tool in critical thinking, it is not very reliable. You know why? We observe things differently. And observation is actually an aspect of perception. And perception, ordinarily, as long as I understand, it's a psychological process by which we become aware of things around us. When our senses are stimulated. That's perception. So what senses are we talking about? Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, feeling touch, smelling. These are the senses. And you know that all these are deceptive. You know that. Because we all don't see the same way, do we? I'm asking, do we all see the same way? No. So you may see something red. Maybe I'm suffering from jaundice. So I see everything yellowish. We all don't hear the same way. We don't feel taste, we don't taste the same way. We don't feel touch the same way, and so on and so forth. So, observation. Then, open-mindedness helps you also to be reflective, to be able to reflect. And the last one is problem solving. Problem solving. In fact, all the things we do must geared towards solving problems. We have been lamenting, crying for far too long. We need to have solutions to our problems. And that is why critical thinking has become very, very relevant in the 21st century. Because critical thinking is about problem solving. We shouldn't only discuss problems, but we should discuss solutions. And one of the ways of discussing solutions is having the analytical mind. Another way is having the means to communicate. Another way is to be creative, very creative. Another way is to be open-minded. And above all, to have the solution itself. To have it. That's problem solving. We seem to talk more about problems than we give solutions. Do you agree? Do you agree? We seem to talk more about problems than we give solution. We hope that this presentation and all we are going to do, and together with what we are learning, and we are going to teach our students, we should get to that point where we will talk more solutions than problems. That's the aim. We should get to that point where we'll talk more solutions than problems. What is problem solving? Problem solving, in general, is having answers to existing challenges. That's what we mean by problem solving. Having answers to existing challenges. Now, when you say existing, and I'm going to give precise definition, existing challenges are challenges that either have been persistent for some time, or you foresee that in the nearest future they will occur. So existing challenges necessarily are not only problems that you have seen. No, you have already foreseen. Remember, being creative is to be visionary. So you can foresee that there's going to be a problem. Let me give you an example. And examples abound in Ghana. Don't you always see that we have areas that are flood prone? Don't we always see that? I'm asking. We do. Don't we caution people that this place, don't build there, don't we? We do. Yet we allow them to. and issues come, and we are going back to it. So you see, that one is something you have seen, that given the situation, this may happen if you go ahead to build. So that is an existing problem. So the scope does not limit itself to only what is pertaining, but what is likely as well to pertain. And having answers to them is what we refer to as problem solving. Problem solving, and we don't do that often. And in acquiring these skills, you are able to acquire what we call applying standards. In solving problems, you should be able to apply standards. This is how, if we do it, it will work. Others have done same, and it has worked for them. If we also apply same, it will work, or even work better for us. And then paying attention to details. One thing we don't do is this, paying attention to details. You don't. Some students don't even write, they don't read instructions, remember. You give them exam question, they don't read instructions. And they go ahead to it. It tells you of what kind of people we have. We have leaders in this country and in Africa who sign to things they never read. And later they tell you that, oh, I didn't read. Then why did you sign? They sign. They don't read, they sign. Especially when it has to do with allowance, remember. When it has to do with allowance, the allowance is first. And sometimes they ask you, where do you sign? Where do I sign? He says, sign here. And they just sign. You don't pay attention. If you don't pay attention, how do you solve problem? How? You don't. You rather will create problem. They come and ask you later and say, but I didn't read. But you have signed. Remember law of contracts. Law of contracts, once you have given your signature, you are bound to it. Then, problem solving helps you clarification. You need it. If you have solutions, answers to existing problems, you have clarifications. You are so clear in your mind that given this, if you go this way, you help us. Then, collaboration comes again. I have solution. You have solution. He has solution. They have solution. We bring them together. We tease, we get some nuances. We arrive at a solution that will help all of us. Is that not the way to go? It is the way to go. And then to arrive at very good decision making, you need this. Very good decision making. You need problem solving. Because remember, you have answers to existing situations. So you are able to arrive at very good, what logic will call cogent decisions. Cogent decisions. And then you are able to evaluate. Remember, some solutions may be useful for about 5 years. After 5 years, you need to go back and revise them. And again, one thing we don't do is this. We don't go back. We don't go back. Once we give solution, we feel that it should be there forever. And if you're a problem solver, you are very grounded. You are very, very grounded. What it means is that you can't be bullied. You know what is right, what to do, and at what time. Very grounded. Coincidentally, you know that the students, they know which lecturers are grounded and which lecturers are not. They have names for us. If you don't know, they have names for us. They do. So, every lecturer and the names they've given. And sometimes they associate us with the names, you know. So if they have a lecture say they have NUS nursing, let's say nursing 101. Instead of saying we have nursing 101, they say I have fish. Maybe I'm the fish. That's what the student. And they know what they mean by I have fish. They have defined you as. And whether that fish means you are grounded in the area or you are not grounded, you need to answer. Are you grounded in the area? If you are grounded, then it means that you are a problem solver. And then you are able to identify patterns. Problem solvers are able to identify patterns. That's the imagined perception of a pattern or meaning where it does not actually and unnecessarily exist. And as I said earlier, if you see something now and you have met a similar thing before, and you have already acquired the other skills, you should be able to identify patterns. Otherwise, things will always be in isolation. Then, being innovative and having the skill we call logical reasoning. Recall we said that critical thinking is systematic reasoning that follows the rules of logic to arrive at informed judgment. And so you are unable to do critical thinking if you're unable to do logical reasoning. Logical reasoning is an integral part of critical thinking. Thank you so very kindly. God bless you. Now, my colleague here asked for this. This is one of my books. This is Introductory Logic and Critical Thinking. Unfortunately, I brought only 5 copies. I will have to sign a personal copy to the president of the university. So what it means is that to be left with 4. One is 50 Ghana. I thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a very loaded presentation. Throughout the presentation, my thoughts were roaming. I remembered, situations in class, conversations I've had with people, and some pleasant, some very unpleasant situations where communication was a problem, people who don't listen. You can say it several times in so many ways, they will not listen. And you don't know what to do with such people. I think you have given us some insights. I think we have a few minutes to invite questions, clarifications, comments, etc. And we'll pass the mic around. Maybe we can take 3 at a time, and you can respond to those questions. Who will want to throw the first stone? Yeah, Prof.
Thank you very much, and let me say that it has been a very thoughtful and critical presentation from our colleague from Cape Coast. As I sat down and listened to you, from your definitions to the end of the presentation, I get a little bit confused between 2 things. Whether critical thinking is equivalent to the scientific method or scientific inquiry, or there is really some significant differences. And related to this is also my confusion as to whether you are talking of critical thinking as a mental process without any involvement of identifying an issue or a phenomena, collecting, processing, analyzing, and interpreting data to find some meaning to it which is more aligned to that of the scientific inquiry or scientific methodology that we all here are very familiar with. My second question is whether critical thinking, though historically it's known or accepted that it can be learned, but whether or not it can be an independent discipline, or it should be subject contextual, meaning that if I'm a teacher or a lecturer teaching mathematics or teaching management, the application of the ideas of critical thinking should be applied in that context, rather than seeing it as a discipline, a subject independent. And I'm saying this because as you went through the core areas that you mentioned, communication, analysis, analytical, innovation. Communication is a discipline, widely accepted, has long history. And what you have explained, that if I went into a communication class, I expect that the communication lecturer will take me through all that you have said. Effective communication would constitute all those characteristics or what you may call requirements to make communication effective. So I'm a little bit, do I say confused? Because yet, if you look at the history, they'll say that critical thinking has been in the debates can be traced back 2,500 years ago, but became a substantive critical issue in the 1980s and all that. So can you help me clarify, make my mind clearer about all these areas that is confusing me? And when you are of my age, it's not good to be confused because the brain is already tired. Thank you.
Prof, I thank you very much. Let me go back to the chair. Chair, do we take a couple of them or we answer them as and when they come? Which one saves time?
I think I have a prerogative here.
Yes, sir.
As I would also want to come in briefly by commending the quality of the presentation that we have had here. And I think if we should, from time to time, be refreshed with such type of intellectual rejuvenation. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you, perhaps from your angle and from the center's perspective, do we want to see a situation where critical thinking is taught as a standalone discipline or course or program, whatever you want to call it, or you would want to advocate for the mainstreaming or integration of critical thinking across the board at the tertiary institution? And I'm asking this question because of my admiration of the relevance of the critical thinking skills that your project seeks to propagate. If we are going to have it, I think it might be very useful for nation building. I can recall that about 10 years ago in the US, they realized that the CEOs of companies resolved to employ philosophers as CEOs in companies, because all those companies that had CEOs with philosophy degrees were performing far, far better because of critical thinking skills that he had brought into the boardrooms. I do not know whether a nation like Ghana would want to go that route, but my question on pedagogy is that, are we seeking to mainstream it, or we want to have a standalone course in that regard?
Yes, sir, please. I think you can respond to
Thank you.
the very loaded questions.
Thank you very, very much. I think President's question is in sync with the second one of us, so I'll try to do them together. And Prof, you are very right. At a point in time in the U.S., they had to employ Plato strategy. That's Platonic philosophy. You know, Plato admonishes that until and unless philosophers become rulers, or those who are already ruling become philosophers, we can never have ideal society. So an ideal society is a society that's ruled by philosophers, because they are the only ones who can think. That's Plato. It's not me. So forgive Plato. Forgive Plato. If there's anybody to be forgiven. Right. But more importantly, I will take the first one and then the other two, as I said, put them together. Is critical thinking equivalent to the scientific method? That's how I caption the question. Is critical thinking equivalent to the scientific method? We want to define the scientific method as induction. That's a method that we know. Science is induction. And indeed, every science is inductive. What it means, therefore, is that critical thinking goes beyond the scientific method. So the scientific method is a subset of critical thinking. And rather surprisingly, this has been treated already. It was part of the chapters I had to treat. I quoted Francis Bacon. You remember Francis Bacon's idols, those who have been exposed to these idols of the tribe, idols of the cave, idols of the marketplace, idols of the theater, you know, where Bacon tells us that until we are able to free ourselves from these idols, we are not able to think critically. Now, induction is not deductive. And that is why critical thinking subsumes the scientific method. The scientific method is under critical thinking. Critical thinking is both deductive and inductive. Now, so what it means is that whereas science uses induction to arrive at its conclusions, its findings, critical thinking goes beyond the scientific method. For instance, critical thinking may want to question beliefs. Beliefs are not necessarily, scientific theories. You know, they are not things that are taught in science. But critical thinking want to interrogate that. And that is different from science, as I said. Now, to interrogate beliefs, you can either be deductive or inductive. If you are deductive, then it means that you are being subjective. For instance, if you come to tell me that you saw Christ in your room, Jesus Christ appeared to you in your room, I mean, that is always true to you. In critical thinking, that is always true to you. So in critical thinking, belief is always true to the person who holds it. And that is why you can't debate it, because you are not there. But if the person now says that because I saw Christ in my room, everybody must believe that Christ exists, that then becomes a problem. I mean, because you saw him, I should believe. When I don't have any basis, I've not seen him, let him reveal himself to me also. Then I'll have basis to believe. It's just the same way as saying that I dreamt about eating banku and tilapia. And then when I woke up, it came to pass. So my dreams come true. I mean, you hold it. You are right. But you cannot universalize, you cannot generalize it. So that is critical thinking. It goes beyond the scientific method. So critical thinking is never the same as the scientific method. The scientific method is part of critical thinking. It takes one dimension. It's one-dimensional. It takes one dimension of critical thinking. Now, do we want critical thinking to be a subject on its own, thoughts on its own, and you know, or whether we want it to be integrative, as in integrated into other courses? Our aim, and that is why this project, And coincidentally, I've been involved, as I said earlier, with JTech activities. It is almost becoming a requirement that critical thinking should be taught as a subject in higher learning institutions and incorporated in courses and programs run by tertiary institutions. So it should be a course on its own to begin with, and then the elements should be incorporated as well in the courses and the programs we read. And that's the aim of this project. The aim is to, so you see what I did is to give content. So my aim was to provide content, critical thinking, what it is, what things go into it. I provided content. My brothers will give how to assess, how to evaluate, how to, question students using critical thinking. And so that we are advocating that, one, it should be a course on its own. And the University of Cape Coast, for instance, every student at level 2 reads critical thinking. So ours is that the course title is Critical Thinking and Practical Reasoning. Critical Thinking and Practical Reasoning. The same is done in Legon. They also use the same course title, Critical Thinking and Practical Reasoning. And then we were at UMAT. They are in talks with us. They want to start as soon as possible, critical thinking. We're at UBIS. Wow. They already have it. We are trying to maybe structure it to speak to the elements we are talking about. So that's our position. It is so important, and it is a course that should be on its own. So our position is that it should be a course on its own, and its element be incorporated in the courses and programs we have. Thank you. Prof, have I been able to, the confusion, is it okay now? Is it gone? God bless you.
Thank you very much. Critical thinking, can it result in a paradoxical answers in some situations? In paradoxical, something that has two sides, both negative and positive, but they are both correct. In the subject in which we find ourselves, economics, sometimes whether we are in the social sciences, you pursue some critical analysis, and an answer that you find may be negative in some sense, it is correct. It is positive in some sense, also correct. Does critical thinking sometimes leave you with two answers which can be acceptable?
Okay, thank you. I want to reaffirm what Dr. Lawrence spoke about. I think part of his question had to do with context, and I was looking forward to you talking more on it, or maybe emphasizing more on it, or maybe I didn't get it in your submission. When you were presenting, you spoke about a male bachelor, a male being a bachelor, something. You made a scenario to that. Yes, a bachelor being an unmarried man. And you said that was wrong. And critically thinking, I disagreed with you contextually, because in our context, if I say a bachelor is a man, it may work. But in a gender polarized environment, someone may disagree with it. So contextually, should we always consider cultural perspective or context-specific issues when we are dealing with critical thinking?
Yeah, Doc. Can I go on? Yeah, For me, looking at the presentation that you have just made, I think that critical thinking is a very important course to be pursued. But my problem is, don't you think that it should be introduced earlier in the basic level of education rather than waiting until coming to the university before we deploy a program like this? Yeah.
I think we'll give him the opportunity to answer those questions, and then we'll take another round. So if you have questions, it will come to your turn. But let me take the opportunity to introduce one of our directors. That is the Director of Finance, Madam Samira. We are grateful you are here. Thank you. So we'll take the next round of. Oh, well, you can respond to those questions, and then we take the next round.
Thank you very much, Madam Samira. You're welcome. When finance people come amongst us, we are very happy. Very well. So I start with my colleague who asked whether critical thinking can resolve paradoxical questions. That's the question you asked. Indeed, it does. And one of the examples we have cited again and again has to do with that. In the Etifro, the Etifro is a very small book written by Plato. It talks about whether something is good because God says it is good, or it is good in itself. That is why God says it is good. Which one would you take? Let me ask again. Is an action pious because it is good in itself, or it is pious because God says it is pious? So you see the paradoxical thing he's talking about. Now, if you say an action is pious in itself, that is why it is pious, it means that piety existed before God. Because you are saying that it is pious in itself. That is why. So it means it existed before the one we probably assume made it. And if you also say that God says it is pious, that is why it is pious, then it means that piety will be arbitrary. Because any other thing could have been as well pious, like evil. Because if you say he made all things, then he as well made piety and evil. Then it means that evil is as well good. So this is a double-sided, question. That is why we said that one of the skills you need to acquire is open-mindedness. Remember. So that if you are looking at something, you don't look at it just one-sided. It has more meaning to it than what you see. And so you have to use either the Lungus method, and as I said, my brothers will come and talk about method and assessment and all this. Either you use the Lungus method or you use the dialectical method, question and answer. You question, answer. In the end, you may not necessarily have been able to define whether it is good in itself or because God says. But you would have been able to learn something very new. Maybe it is good. And it came together with God. But not necessarily God said it is good. Or God said it is good. And God said all other things are good. We have made them bad. So we have questions that actually do not have one answers. And they hold. And so it's allowed. Now, to my dear sister, yes, contextualizing. That's true. Recall I said that if you say a bachelor is an unmarried man, it is unacceptable because man, the scope is too broad. And then somebody may as well not agree, like he said, and you are right. You have to question evidence. You see, That's a hallmark of critical thinking. So I'm saying that we can rather say a bachelor is an unmarried male adult. Male adult. That's contextualizing it. You can still say that, well, I disagree, because how do you mean when you say male adult? In that case, you are asking me to define the scope of the male adult, which you are right, in any case, to ask me. And so I say that a male adult is ABCD. That is contextualizing. And that is indeed what critical thinking is asking us to do. Whatever it is, and I kept mentioning when I was presenting, I kept mentioning precise definition, and I use words like mature. Here, mature people enter here. What do you mean when you say mature people? You need to put it into context. Then we are able to tell what exactly it means to come here. If you come here, then you fit into that issue. So it is that which we are supposed to do. And as critical thinkers, we rather are enjoined to question evidence. So that's fantastic of you. You need to question it. I don't agree. I would have put it this way. And that really is a hallmark of a critical thinker, you know. And then you come out with what your position is. And it's also interrogated. You see whether it solves the problem or does not solve the problem. And then, shouldn't it be introduced at a basic level, okay, levels lower than this level? That would have been ideal. That would have been ideal. However, having gone through myself and the content, I'm really thinking it may not be too helpful. And again, we are open for suggestion. We are thinking that may not be too helpful at that level. Maybe you can send some element there. Like in those days, some of us actually wrote common entrance. So at class 4, you already wrote common and you were in secondary school. You know. And if you had gone through A level, you know that you would have done logical reasoning. It was compulsory. These days, we don't have that there. And the logical reasoning we were doing then was very basic, remember, very, very basic. But at least it helped. So we can maybe share some areas and start there. Basic, very, very basic. But the content is quite voluminous and much more. It needs higher thinking than the basic. So what I would rather advocate is that maybe some basic elements we send there. Then or the most important one, the higher ones are done at the tertiary level. Thank you very much.
Yeah, in the old secondary school system that had sixth form, the A-level paper you would do in your 3 subjects, and then there was an additional compulsory paper called the general paper. Yes. And that general paper had 1/3 in logic. But you would see that part was merely an introduction to the main logic that you'll be doing at the university level. That was, I think, basically limited to syllogism, yes. And yes, formal logic, syllogism, so that you can do. So it is that type of, bringing it down that I think has been proposed. That I think those of you in philosophy at the tertiary level should think of coming out with something that can be done at the secondary school level so that the students would be having the fundamentals of such an important skill in rational thinking. Yeah. The pre-sec secondary school was famous because it's one of the few secondary schools that taught logic at the 6th form. And that gave them a competitive edge when they came to the university. So it is doable, and I think you may have to take note. UCC can provide leadership in this curriculum development, and then you work with your NCCA, and then get something for the secondary school level. It can help us tremendously, especially when these days, the government is talking of promoting engineering and artificial intelligence. You need your structured, thinking students to acquire those skills at the formative stages of their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
All right, we take the next round of questions. Mind you, we have a snack break, and after that, the next session. I think we take the last batch of questions, and then we go for a break. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Doc, in your presentation, you said having solution to a problem is a hallmark of critical thinking. To an extent, I would disagree and propose why not developing solutions to problems? Because if the problem is already, if the solution is there, why wait for the problem to occur? But we could have problems and there's no solution. So it would be better we have solution development skills as a hallmark of critical thinking than having the solution. That's my thoughts.
Doc, listening to you reveals a very important aspect of academic work. The basis of research or whatever depends on all this that you talk about. And the answering of questions, even in examination. You know, you're at a university that this is taught these days. It's just a semester program. And I wonder whether students actually acquire some of these skills before progressing. Can it be logic 1, logic 2, or something like that? This reminds me of a question a student asked me in class. He asked me passionately what lecturers mean by asking students to discuss when he knows that discussion takes place between two people. So whom is he going to do the discussion with? On paper. So that tells me a lot of gaps in the thinking of our students. So can it be semester 1, semester 2, or what? That's my question.
Thank you, Prof. Or Doctor, the presenter. I have just one question I want to ask. In your presentation, I think in logic, there are ways of classifying the questions, and I am in the languages. When you defined a bachelor as an unmarried male adult, for me, that's in the languages, we would describe that as a descriptive definition. Now, in most of the things that we do in language, we want the definition to be an operational definition or a working definition. And to get a meaningful working definition, there are two areas that you have to look at, what you call the genus and then the differential. But from what you have presented, my problem is, once you have your own way of classifying, and we also have our own way of classifying, when we are looking at logic in our work, how do you go about it?
So how would you have defined it? How would you have defined it?
Well, if...
A bachelor?
Yes, so if I were defining a bachelor in a language, I would start with a male adult that will form the genus. And then the differential will be who is unmarried.
Okay, and we said that a bachelor is an unmarried male adult. Yes. Interesting. Are we done? That's the last set. Okay. So I will speak to that right away.
Thank you for the presentation. Mine is a comment and not a question. I commend you for the presentation. And on the basis of where to start logical reasoning as a program or as a course, I think that I support the fact that it should be taught in the basic. It can be from JSS, but with basics. Then whilst we progress from secondary to tertiary, we go deeper. Because I remember I asked a question in class, and it was on climate. I had spoken so much on climate and weather, thinking my students really understood what I was teaching. Then I gave an assignment. Weather is what you get, and climate is what you expect. And I was thinking that with the definitions given on weather and climate, my students will give me, argue their point out that weather is what you get and climate is what you expect. And they were totally confused. So that means that we can teach and teach and teach, but they are expecting that you ask them question 1, what is weather? Then they will give you your definition back. Question 2, what is climate? Then they'll give it, but the moment you twist it, they become confused. So that means that they are unable to think through the questions very well and expect that they give you back what you have given to them. This is also evident in research as students. This person said this, they reference. This person said this, they reference. But they are unable to comment on the arguments authors have given. So since this person says this, since Dr. Akosam 2020 has said this, it is this. But what do you also say as a researcher, based on whatever you have read? And we are unable to do that. So as students, we still lack the ability to think through, even after reading lots of articles. And I believe it's a requirement even for the job environment. If you are unable to think after your degree, what else? So that means that you sit in class for 4 years, you do your national service, they give you an assignment to do, you are not able to give out what is expected of you because you are not able to think, even with your certificate. So I think that it should be taught from basic, that's JSS at least, to university level. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have a lot of... Dr. Akwasam, you want to add to what she said? Because she made reference to you.
The Cape Coast people will go back. So.
Our time.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Whether it should be taught at the basic level or not, I think cannot be debated now. In that, from what she said, if I'm a lecturer and I'm supervising your thesis, your research work, the fact that you are into master's doesn't mean that you should automatically know how to write a thesis or a project work. It's my responsibility to teach you what you are writing. I had a similar product at the master's level, and the supervisor thought maybe I wasn't good. But the fact was, he was expecting me to know what to do, which was wrong. You present something to him and say your colleagues are doing, go and ask them, no, what is your duty as a lecturer in what I am doing? So at our level, we are taught to go and teach the basic people. So in reference, what you are saying, what you are saying is that when we develop the skills and we get the opportunity, whether at the basic level, at the SHS level, it's our duty to teach our students how to analyze issues in a critical way as you are presented. Not necessarily having it as a subject at the basic level, because it's a skill that you are trying to help people develop. That before you say this, you should have gone through the basic steps that actually underpin whatever that you are doing. So it cannot be a basic level subject that can be taught. It is inculcated in those at the upper level who have the opportunity to have contact with the lower levels, that as I'm teaching as a lecturer here, the topic, the question I give, before I go into an exam, so to say that discuss, I should have shown you how to discuss. When I say discuss, I should have taught you in class that discuss means that this is how you go about it. Not just enter an examination or you go and meet, discuss, or examine. I should explain what an examine question means, or define question means, or discuss question means.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I allowed to?
Thank you very much. Let's give him the opportunity to respond to. It looks like we might take another round.
Whoa.
After this. So please,
we'll go back. So that's why, if you can allow him. His hand has been out for some
we
time.
have at least 3 people who have.
3 more?
Yes. So we don't want to take all of them.
Let's combine. Let me speak to this very briefly.
Yes.
Let me speak to this. Develop solution instead of having solution. I mean, we may be engaging in semantics. We may just be engaging in semantics, and I think we shouldn't split hairs over this. I mean, developing. If you are developing solutions and you are having solutions, as I said, we may be engaging in semantics. It doesn't change anything. You see, the end product will give solution. The end product will give solution. So whether we are developing, you are having, it's just dealing with semantics. So that should be, it shouldn't be a problem. And then should we do 1 semester, 2 semesters? That has always been the problem. When we went to UBase, they asked that question. That critical thinking is so important. They don't, and especially when you are dealing with so many students. You know, those of us in public universities, you are dealing with 1,500 students, 3,000 students. You know, how do you even assess them well for you to be very sure that they have acquired the skills? It's something we are still discussing it, whether we should make it 2 semesters or 1 semester. But the suggestion is that it is so important that it should be made 2 semesters. But then again, we should tailor the content to have relevance to our problems. You know, critical thinking should have relevance to our problems. Otherwise, it will be done like any other course, and that will not help us. Then again, sir, a bachelor, your definition is that if we had rather per language, unfortunately, I'm also in language as well. That's why I speak language which is almost impeccable, remember. Yeah, so if you say, for instance, a male adult who is unmarried, that is your definition. Yes, that's what you suggested. A male adult who is unmarried, that's what you suggested. Yeah, so that's exactly what critical thinking is saying. And that is true because it is commutative. In critical thinking, the commutative rule, which we know in maths, that 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2. It holds. So if somebody says that a bachelor is an unmarried male adult, a bachelor is an unmarried male adult, and then another says that yes, a male adult who is unmarried is a bachelor, they are saying the same thing. And the grammatical content is the same. It doesn't lose meaning, does it? Exactly. So you see that in the end, both definitions would have given the same scope and the same solution that we look for. Because grammatically, it's not wrong to say that a bachelor is an unmarried male adult. Grammatically, it's also not wrong to say that a male adult who is unmarried is a bachelor, or a male adult who is unmarried is a bachelor. And in that case, you would have defined it in terms of grammar, in terms of the genus, and then as you noted. So we use the commutative rule, in which case we can accept both definitions, and there's no loss of meaning. So grammar, indeed, comes very much into critical thinking. There's no loss of meaning. Right. Then, indeed, you see that, thank you for the comment, and I will want to even add to it that our students don't review literature. Like you said, they only quote. Meanwhile, the title is what? Literature review. Meanwhile, according to this, and then they continue writing, according to this. So where is the review? They don't review because they don't have the skills. And I agree with you entirely. They don't have the skills. So what is it that they are going to review? They only will keep quoting. Thank you. And thank you for the comment, sir. Right. So the last set.
Okay. I think we take the very last round. very, very last one. I think each of us, we all have questions, but we can't exhaust the questions now. The Dean of the Faculty of Law has a question, and after that, the Director of Finance, Madam Samira Adams, also has a question. The gentleman, yes, please. Maybe you can start.
Thank you very much. A quick one. Whilst we are trying to decide on where to start critical thinking, I would like to speak for IT, information technology. I would like to say that communication between two people, of course, is facilitated or made possible by the senses. But there's a gap in communication when remoteness comes into play. Once we find ourselves in a distant environment or we start going far away from ourselves, then there is a problem in communication. And this is what IT comes in to solve. So we realize that information communication technologies comes in to help people still communicate, but remotely. And this particular field of helping to transfer my ideas to you and yours to me is where the danger is. And this is, the people in this area must have this course or this program. So I would like to add my voice to it, that to the lowest level possible, IT students should be taken through this, because they are in a critical stage where they can mess the information up or fix it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have two issues. The debate on
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I go ahead? Oh, Director of Finance. We are happy you are talking. You know what it comes with.
But then even the games they play encourage them to think critically, to think out of the box, to maybe the primary one level where you're not just setting them normal maths questions, but you're tweaking it in a way that this is not what was taught in class. Your homework is encouraging you to look at it at a different angle. And I think that kids these days are bright enough to understand that. And if we miss that critical foundation years where we teach them how to think critically, then it becomes a problem which we expect in the tertiary level to solve. And it becomes more difficult because then people are set in their ways, which is why they'll be expecting to see the definition there, and they'll be expecting to answer the question only where it's, it shows up in the notes. And for most people who actually finish secondary school here, they really struggle when they go abroad to fit in, because we're used to the chew-pour system where we write the, we learn, we copy the notes, we write the exam, and after we are done with it, and it doesn't follow through. So for me, I would say critical thinking should be brought way down. It's from birth, from development, from all ages of a child's development, there has to be elements of critical thinking built into a child's life, way till they become an adult. And it also inspires confidence in children, where, it gives them confidence to tackle questions that are not the standard ones they see in their book. And so I think that we may be discussing it at this level, but lots of primary schools have noticed that and are actually doing it. Because even in my kids' schools, they come and they're like, okay, how do you infer from this passage? It's not just, this is a red book. Say, what color was the book? No, the answer is not in the passage as direct as that. So for me, it has a role to play way from birth.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And indeed, I agree entirely with that. That's why I said earlier that this has always been the case. The idea of those of us who were introduced to logical reasoning at sixth form level, and that's a conscious way of introducing us to, but unconsciously, as she said, some have already introduced this, but we're talking about consciously introducing students to this, and it's very, very important. We can start with some basic things, not really the tough ones. We start with some basic things. By the time they get to the tertiary level, they already have the basics, and that really will help. And the IT, in fact, that's very, very important as well. We need to do that. But let me come to you. Prof, you see, the thing about logic and critical thinking is always about precision. It's always about precision. And precision will go with cultural settings. Now, somebody marries at 13 in a different jurisdiction. It is possible that their definition of adult starts from 13. Just like in the US, adult is 16 years. Here, adult is 18 years. So when the grammar person says that an unmarried male adult and your adult starts from 12 years, it means that you fit in. If yours start from 18 years, you fit in. If yours start from 16 years, you fit in. Unless, of course, we want to now widen the scope and say that we should include age. So in that case, we have to say that a male adult here means any man 13 and above. So in that case, you are being precise. So that's another way of doing it. In which case we are now adding 13 and above. I'm so happy that my example has generated a lot of debate, and I'm going to add it to my writing so that. But let me say that I'm humble. Thank you very much. I'm grateful. Bless you.
Okay, Reverend, thank you very much for this exciting presentation and discourse. Critically looking, our snack break is over. We should have been back by 12. It's now past 12, but I will not torture you. We'll still go, have our snack, continue our discussions over there. And in 15 minutes, we'll be back to take the second presentation, which is so critical for us. That is teaching strategies and assessment techniques. Snack is the next floor. So please, can we all go there and then refresh ourselves and come back in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
A philosopher and somebody who has been trained in the area. You could be trained in the area. So I have just 2 of the books left. So if you want it, you can come for it, please. Okay, I'll give you. We have more in Cape Coast. If you want it, I'll take your name, I'll take your money. I'll make sure you get the book at most by Friday. But for now, you told me you needed it. And he also told me you needed it. And you. And that is all. That is for those I brought here. Mommy, you need it? I'll take down your name. And I'll bring to you by Friday, other things being equal. Friday is tomorrow? Oh, then it should be next week Wednesday. Mondays, so Wednesday, next week Wednesday.
Hello. Yes, we are ready for the next session. Our colleagues are still trickling in, but I think we need to start, and they will join us very soon. Then the next topic, so critical for us, is what are the strategies that we need to use as teachers, and how do we assess what we are doing? There's teaching strategies and assessment techniques, to be presented by Dr. Kofi Acheo Owusu and then Dr. Godwin Abuaji. Can we give them a big hand? Let's welcome them. Before you start, I want to relay a message to you from the Vice Chancellor, the President, and the Registrar. They have been called to perform some other duties, so they will not be with us now. But the Vice President is here with us, so we are ready to go. So, Doc, over to you.
When I use it, it makes me look like a pastor or a musician. I don't know what to do of them. All right, good afternoon once again. My name is Kofi Acheo. I'll be taking the first part of the discussion. So I'll be looking at the teaching strategies. And then afterwards, Dr. Abuaji will come in with the assessment principles. I want to crave the indulgence of the Dean to change the rule we set for the first presentation. It will be very awkward for me to teach as well without anybody asking questions. Until I finish, then we bring the questions. It will defeat the argument and some of the things I will talk about. So when you take it from the educational psychology perspective, Albert Bandura will talk about observational learning. Children will copy, or learners will learn from what you do rather than what you say. So they want to see you do it, and then they will do. So please, Dean, am I permitted? So that even as I talk, if you have a question, we bring it to discuss, we move on, comments and suggestions, so that when we are done, we are done. Rather than me doing 30, 45 minutes, and then questions start flowing. Making the connection sometimes does not work well. So even as I lead the discussion, if there is anything you want to say, just say it, bring it up, and then we clear it, and then we move on. Is that fine with you, say? Thank you. I have the platform. All right. So we are going to look at some of the things we have been doing that we need to keep doing, and then some of the things probably we may not be doing that we want to encourage each one of us to do, such that our learners will develop the various components or skills that cumulatively form the critical thinking we are all interested in. And this is just, by the way, the new curriculum that has been brought to be in Ghana has critical thinking as one of the core competencies. So if you go to NACA website, nacca.gov, and you look at the curriculum framework, they have a beautiful diagram there. The first thing on the core or global competencies is critical thinking. So we want to start from the basic. The downside, however, is that when we teach, we don't inculcate those things. So the curriculum is beautifully done, but its enactment, its implementation is the problem. So if our teachers were as we were able to do it as stated in the document, then our learners right from the word go would have developed these skills. All right. You have projected the second part of the presentation. Awesome. This is mine. So, my students call me Teacher Kofi. That is my scientific name, so you can call me Teacher Kofi too. I like that one. So I think from the interactions we've had this morning, we all agree that our students lack critical thinking in answering questions, in their everyday life. Some of the things people share, even on social media. I question, do you really want to spread this? Have you thought about it? But as soon as we see it, especially if it is from the people we don't like, either political or religious side, we spread it without thinking through to see if it's there. So, how can we ensure? Oh, so this one, you can see the pointer. That we let learners focus on how to think in our teaching rather than what to think. When we teach, is it possible that we will move from providing information such that learners will just regurgitate to where they will think and a colleague said develop the solution? If they are able to do that, then critical thinking will be developed in their everyday life. And one of the key ingredients of critical thinking, as far as teaching is concerned, is active learning. That is why I said I want you to participate rather than I finishing the discussion before you come in. Because then you become passive recipients of the information and you're not active. Most of us in our classroom, students come there and then they just copy. In fact, some don't even miss anything, for lack of a better word, if they don't come to class. And becomes even more problematic when we have sold materials, or you have prepared some pamphlets, or you have given handouts or slides. You've given the slides. I'll give you my lecture slides at the beginning of the lecture with the course outline. But then if you don't come to class, it's like you miss 50%. The slides are bullets that I speak to, that we engage. So students will end up writing more information on the slides than what they already had. But some of us, the pamphlet is given, and when we come, we open the page, we read, we try to do some form of explanation, we move on like that. So students are very passive. If students are passive, there's no way they will develop open-mindedness or problem solving or creativity or all the other forms or components of the critical thinking. Because they came to class, they just sat down, received the information, and they left. So central to critical thinking teaching, any teaching strategy that will develop students' critical thinking is active learning. And this is where learners are actively engaged, asking questions, responding to questions, bringing up their doubts, bringing out their disagreements, such that these issues can be rectified. So here, we are looking at how we can promote analysis and synthesis of information, how we can promote evaluation of information, to how students will just recall or apply. No, we want to move higher as far as the thinking is concerned. I think the last time we came here, way back, we looked at the Bloom's taxonomy. I've been here before. We looked at the Bloom's taxonomy. Now, what I'm challenging us to do is that if we want to foster critical thinking in learners, we have to have a paradigm shift. You realize that in the Bloom's taxonomy, the remember or the knowledge level mostly will form the broad base where when they become for moderation, you look at some lecturers, their questions, and about 80% is recall and that kind of stuff. And UCC will always complain. Because if you focus on that, it's just regurgitation of information. It's recall. So for critical thinking to be enhanced in our learners, we ought to have a paradigm shift where consciously we will emphasize more on creation, how learners can come up with their ideas other than what we have presented in the manual, in the slides. Or if we believe in the old Bloom's taxonomy, evaluation. So we want to focus more on evaluation, analysis, synthesis, rather than the knowledge, understanding, and application. So if we are able to have that paradigm shift right from our teaching to our assessment, learners will develop that critical thinking. I always have this experience when I take a group for the first time. They don't do well in my first quiz. They don't do well in my first quiz. Not that the questions are difficult, just that they are not used to. I'll do multiple choice, 20 items, 30 minutes. But then the questions are analysis. So I teach, for instance, this semester, I'm handling psychological basis of teaching and learning. We are looking at educational psychology principles that teachers use in the classroom, looking at how children develop, and therefore the teaching strategies that we can use at any level of development. And we looked at the various stages of these theories. For instance, if we take Piaget, we look at Piagetian theory, the 4 stages and what have you. They are used to list the 4 stages of Piaget's cognitive development. Then they will list. Or all the following are the stages of Piaget's theory except, and then they will circle. No. So I take the pre-operational stage child and I ask a question like, Aku, who is 4 years old, is not able to understand that the water that her mommy poured from the tall glass into the flat bottom flask have the same amount. Which stage of Piagetian theory is Aku operating? So now you have to go back, think through, and look at the characteristics the child is exhibiting and come up with the stage. So when they finish the quiz, they say these questions, they say it's not difficult. When we analyze it, direct. You won't get direct from me. So if we are able to move from emphasizing on the recall to where learners will break down information, where they will see the worthwhileness of the information, and where they can create the information, critical thinking will be developed. It is not only in the assessment, because if you have not taught them that way, you cannot assess them that way. So in my class, even as we are discussing this, I show them videos of children undergoing such theories. I have questions that we will discuss intermittently so that you see divergent views in the class. And therefore, I have every moral right to assess you that way. So if you've not taught that way and you assess that way, then they will say that, Madam, we didn't teach the things that you brought in the exams. And some of them will get angry. And it's justifiable, because the assessment ought to reflect the kind of teaching you have done. So let's have a conscious paradigm shift where we are moving from recall and regurgitation of information to analysis, synthesis, and evaluation of information. If we're able to do that, our learners will develop these critical thinking skills that we are all emphasizing on. Now, these are some of the strategies that we will discuss briefly, and then we will close. These are not exhaustive. There are other strategies. These are select few that we can discuss. So before I move on from where I started to where I've reached, if you have any contribution, comment, insult, you can bring it on board and then we move on. I don't want the whole show situation. You know the whole show. So if there is anything you want to add, that is fine. If you have any experience, what you have been doing in your class that you want to share, that is also welcome, because sometimes people are doing excellently well in their small corner and others are not aware. So if you've done something that your students appreciated, then you bring it on board so that others can learn from it. All right, so we will pick the first one, the inquiry-based learning. There are various specific strategies within the inquiry-based. I'm not going to talk about the nitty-gritties. I've put all of them together. You can look at the 3E, you can look at 5E, the 7E, the React model, various strategies. And this morning, Prof talked about, is Prof in the sciences? Oh, okay. So yeah, he was interested when he mentioned the scientific method. Those of us in the science, the Department of Science Education, we follow the scientific method. You want to hazard a guess, have a hypothesis, collect empirical evidence, and come to the conclusion and inference. All those things will fall under the inquiry-based learning. And inquiry is not, even though it's emanating from the sciences, it is not limited to the sciences. You can do inquiry even in the social science. So here, we want learners to be active participants of the instructional process. They go out, search for the information, analyze and put them together, and come and share. It is not just about learners going to come up with information, come and stand there and present. Some of us at the beginning of the semester, we share the topics. Groups, group 1, unit 1, group 2, unit 2, and then when they come and present, we leave. Okay, next group, then we say that we've taught. No, that one is not teaching. That one is deceiving public officer. Yes. So, we want the learners to be engaged in the teaching and learning process. What is it that they can find and then come up with and then share with colleagues? So the fulcrum of inquiry-based learning are some of the things I have highlighted. We talk about seeking evidence. That is finding information that supports the points that they want to make. Now, they are not just seeking the evidence, they are seeking it to address specific pertinent questions. When they get the information, they ought to be able to explain the information. And these are very, very important. This morning, our friend in the, economics asked about an issue having divergent responses that all could be correct, and which is true. In the inquiry base, that is our focus. You want learners to come up with alternate explanations. And it leads to open-mindedness. What is it that they found that is different from what even you, the lecturer, has? That still answers the question. Some of us, we are so fussy. We are fascist, such that if students give definition and they even use synonyms, we remark them wrong. Say, is that what I gave to you? No. Learners should be able to find alternate explanations. In the scientific world, we have what you call alternative frameworks. I'll come to you, Daddy. Previously, we used to call them misconceptions. Okay, so you've heard about misconception. In the science education literature, people are moving away from misconceptions to alternative frameworks. Why? Because what you think is a misconception today may be the right response tomorrow. We all used to learn my very ass may just see under 9 planets, isn't it? Now the planets are no more 9. So all those who finish at 7, you have to come and learn the science again. The science has changed. definition of malaria from the Latin is bad air. People thought that it was coming from air. So they gave it bad air, malaria. But it's not like that. So if you say somebody has a misconception, technically means that their response is different, alternative to the scientific view. People say, nah. It may be inaccurate today, but it could be the right response the next time around. So why don't you call it alternative frameworks? So is it possible that our learners will be allowed to come up with alternative explanations? That will still answer the question. That is one of the critical issues with inquiry-based learning. Yes, sir?
My comment is one of the examples where the lecturer will say, oh, I didn't give you this one. Ignore this. For me, I consider the lecturer that didn't know this subject. Because what matters is not you repeating the word, it's the meaning. So this is the same meaning in different words. When we create creativity, I said this, and then I put it differently. I guess it's what matters more. So for me, when it happened, it means that you are not mastering your subject. It's why I said you should not be teaching a subject where you are not mastering, because you are limited. You cannot go outside the box, understand, and accept what other comes. What they probably, I think, is the problem.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And the sad reality is that all of us, this and goes to all of us, teachers are bullies, especially teachers in our parts of the world. When we come and we stand there, we think we are the boss and students are there. And therefore, whatever we say is the final answer or whatever. Sometimes we go and we realize that this information is wrong, but we don't have, in quotes, that humility to come and say that, oh, yesterday the point I made was not accurate. I once had this encounter in my house. My wife is also a teacher, so my children are in trouble. Their gifts are all books. She teaches in the nursing school at Cape Coast. And in the nursing, she's a midwife. They do, how do they call it? Conference marking. So you don't necessarily mark your own script. They share. So sometimes you mark even out of your own subject. And she brought these scripts down, and she was marking. And the students were getting it wrong. Initially, she was not bothered. But what caught her attention was that all the students were writing similar stuff, but the scheme was contrary. So she asked me, I didn't know. She said, if students are writing the same thing, my first issue was maybe they are copying. She said, no. It's not just like students with similar index number or close in like if people are sitting by. It is across. So okay, then probably the teacher said this and that. That is what it is contrary to. Then she concluded about it's a former principal. She said, this is the principal's course. Then you are in trouble. The scheme was different from what the students were writing. So I asked her to go back, and then she should go and ask. So when she submitted it to the academic committee and they sent it to the course tutor, she looked and said, I gave the answers to question 2 to question 3. And students were being marked wrong. And if she had not noticed it, and students had been marked down, and after the school reopens and they are discussing it, there's no way you would have agreed or whatever it is. So sometimes we should be able to come down and let us realize that we are learning this together with the learners. Every batch of students should teach you something, and you learn from them. When I did my PhD, my supervisor was into primary science, so at the university. But when you go to their level, basic level, they don't sit on chairs. They sit on the floor. So what he did was that at the university level, when they come, they will sit on the floor. He will sit on the floor with the students. He invited me several times, and I was not comfortable sitting on the floor. I'm doing PhD, why should you sit on the floor? But the man has PhD and he's on the floor. And I asked him, Dr. Astor, why is it? When they go to the field, this is how the setup ought to be. So if you don't start now, they will not develop that skill. And if you don't know him and you enter the class, you know who is a teacher and who is a learner. And that was a very returning care for me. That is why in my class, I don't let the students call me Doc. I ask them to call me Kofi. And they were not able to call me Kofi, so they say Teacher Kofi. And that has become my name. Because we want titles and we see the gap. But when they can relate with you, they are able to open up. One of the things that militates against critical thinking in a part of the world is the social structure. So when people were talking about the context, I was very happy. See, our children are not able to open up in the house, and they use that to grow. So when they are in school, they are not able to ask questions. When they come to the university and say that, talk, open up, they are still shy and afraid. So we need to encourage that right from the word go, and it to be helpful. Good. So there are levels of inquiry that we will look at. We have the confirmation type of inquiry. We can have the structured type of inquiry. We have the guided, and then we can have the open inquiry. This is from Bayer, Smetana, and Beans. When you look at Jerome Bruner's discovery, he will categorize them into two: open inquiry and then the guided inquiry. In the guided inquiry, those of us who do science, we do that a lot in our labs. We go to the biology or physics or chemistry lab, we have a set of steps. Step 1, take 5 ml of solution A against that. Then they will give you the step and they say, observe the color change. What is the end point? You have some steps that we are following to come to the final solution. In the open, unguided one from Brunner, we just give the issue to the learner. The learner will go through and come up with it. Sometimes we do that, and it is helpful. So you look at these ones. Here, in these 4, the levels differ in the amount of information that the teacher will provide. That is a guidance. So I always use the project or even MPhil or PhD thesis. At each level, the guidance differ. At the PhD level, the student has more freedom. He or she is becoming an expert, so he must or she must have control over the subject. At the undergraduate level, if you ask them to write literature review, you get according to. You have to read, change stuff. The guidance there is more as compared to that at the PhD level. So at the confirmatory inquiry, we just want the learner to confirm some relationship that we know. I mentioned the chemistry one. In biology, we also do it. Test for food substances. We know that when you put iodine solution in any carbohydrate substance, you get color change of blue-black. So we give the students these reagents. They get the blue-black. Hey, this is carbohydrate, and they are happy. They are just confirming stuff. So we can do the confirmatory depending on the level and the content you are teaching. Then we can have the structured inquiry where students don't know the expected outcome. They don't know the end point, but they go through the process and then they try to hazard what has happened in order to justify the process. That is a structured inquiry. Here, the guided one, students are given the question and they develop a procedure to solve the problem. Some of us in supervising students, either undergraduate project or postgraduate thesis, we give them the topic. If you do that, you are more or less doing guided inquiry. You didn't let them think, conceptualize the problem themselves. You gave it to them, and then you are going to help them come out of it. But what we want at the postgraduate level is an open inquiry, where the learner or the student comes in, probably discuss his or her conceptualization. I will say, I think I want to do ABC. You ask, okay, how is it possible? What about, okay, so go and put the problem on paper. This one is the learner who is coming up with the question, and the learner will come up with the methods to solve it. Sometimes their methods may be wrong. You look at the situation, say, I want to do descriptive surveys. But you are looking at the effect of something on something. How will you identify the causal relationship if you do a survey? So say, you mean I have to do experimental studies? So, okay, I'll go and think about it. So they come up with the question at the open inquiry, and then based on the question, they develop the strategy to solve it. It's not cast in stone which one ought to be used. Depends on the level of the learner. What research has found out is that when you do open inquiry for learners at the lower end, some get frustrated when they are not finding the solution. But even as they mature, they are able to do the open inquiry. So at the lower end, a guided inquiry is more suitable because they know every step of the way will be there to guide them, or even confirmatory inquiry can be done so that learners will not be frustrated. Now, for any form of inquiry, there ought to be these steps going through. There ought to be the observation. This is where the learner comes in contact with the issue that is at stake. Then he must conceptualize the problem or bring up questions. So that's why I was talking about the scientific method earlier. It follows the scientific method. You make the observation, you hazard a guess, that's your hypothesis, and you investigate. You find ways that can be solved using whatever approach you want. Some will not work. You refine the process until you're able to come to appropriate conclusion and make the required inference or how you share the information. Discussion is very, very important. When you look at some of the inquiry process, specific ones like the 5E, explanation stage and elaboration stages are very, very critical. The learner having the information is not enough if they are not able to tell you what it means. So when we discuss, I'll discuss also Bell's meaningful learning with students. There is a teaching approach or learning approach that he calls rote discovery. And students get confused. How can you discover something and then you memorize? Hey, that's happening. You discovered information, but you couldn't make meaning out of it. You couldn't explain. So you just chewed the thing as we say it in our parlance. But we also have meaningful discovery. You discovered information, but you can own it. You can explain. You can justify why A leads to B and what have you. That is just meaningful discovery. So even though you have come across the information, you've gone through the inquiry process, it is not just enough to have the information. You must own the information. One of the things we used to catch students who did not do their own thesis is at the defense. Is that not it? You ask the questions, See, sir, when we were doing this, I asked them, you and who? You and who? So, in fact, the analysis, I didn't do it. So they will start with the analysis. Okay, as for statistics, we allow. Sometimes it's not easy. So, okay, you didn't do it. But what about the interpretation? So, So, you see, when you put it together, I just put it there. So, okay, that is fine. But what about its relationship with your question? As for the research questions, you stated them yourself. So, if somebody did it for them, you get them with these questions. They have the information. In fact, sometimes the thesis will pass excellently. The examiners or the external assessors will give high score. The person comes to defend the thing. They just read it. They don't own the information. So it's not just about go and find information. No. When you get information, are you able to critique and analyze and own it? That is where the critical thinking skills come in. As for the search, yes, because this era we have the internet and what have you, it's easy to get information. But can you own the information? Have you been able to extrapolate and elaborate on the information? That is where I said that we need to emphasize on analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. You have the information. Can you break it down to each component parts? Can you put it in a new way that is uniquely yours? And that is where the critical thinking skills will be developed. So it's not just about, oh, today we are going to do inquiry. You do this, you do that, and then they get a solution. And, hey, we found it, hey, we found it. Do they own the information they have acquired? And that is the place where the emphasis ought to be placed. Good. So these are very, very important things that we need to do. So I just put this question. I intentionally moved away from the sciences to use a general thing, maybe history, How many of you have heard about the Spanish flu? Yeah, a long time ago. Good. So if you ask students to look at what is happening with the COVID, now the Kufuor says COVID is gone, so you can go without a mask. If you look at the situation with the COVID, how can learners relate that with the Spanish flu? So you set them on an investigation. And are you aware that those days too, people were scared of the vaccine? Just as some are scared of the vaccine. And there were, what do we call them? Conspiracy theories. Just as we have them. So if learners are able to search for the information, analyze it, see the analogies, critique, then realize that some components of the critical thinking skills will be developed in them. So it's not only limited to the sciences. Inquiry can be done in any area and in any subject. And as I said earlier, the emphasis ought to be placed about how they can own the information, the explanations and the discussions that will come out of it, not just the search for the information. Good. Any question? Contribution? Is anybody in the history here? Those in history? Oh, I would have loved them to talk about the Spanish flu. All right. So, if learners go through this approach, for instance, if you ask them to solve this question, investigate. I want to see, maybe in 2 minutes, we discuss the possible components of critical thinking that they can develop from undergoing this investigation or from conducting this investigation. Is my question clear? It's not clear? Hey. When I teach, I either volunteer you to talk or you volunteer yourself to talk. So you have to talk, otherwise you will defeat the purpose of this session. You can't foster critical thinking and your learners will be passive. It is not possible. So let's look at this issue. Our question is the top one, main one. If learners should go through this investigation, what are some of the components of critical thinking skills they can develop? You raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic. Or if you have a very audible voice, you can speak from wherever you are.
All right, so I would like to look at it from this point. Let's say trying to bring out a thoughtful question and also looking at how important the question is. The question I have on my mind is this. Looking at the two, first thing I would like to know from investigating the Spanish flu is to find out whether it actually went, whether it was resolved, or whether it mutated into something else. Because that will help me know whether we are dealing with such a situation where COVID will never go away, or COVID eventually will go away. So that will be my first line of question. Then the second one too, I would like to look at probably how far it spread and which countries, if there were, at that time, were able to deal with it better, so that I know where to look for visa and then start heading. So these are the two questions I'll first ask.
Now my question back to you. So if you ask yourself these two questions, which component of critical thinking as the learner, you are asking yourself these questions in order to solve the issue. By doing that, what aspect of critical thinking, as we saw from Reverend, are you developing? Is the question clear?
From the answer he gave, you'll be developing analysis.
So you are developing your analytical skills. In fact, Madam said it, but I didn't call it. So are you following? So our analytical skills will be developed from these questions that our brother is asking himself. What again can we do? And what again can we develop? Sorry.
Based on the question, they will try and recall what happened during the Spanish flu era and what happened during the COVID-19. So they are also going to recall. Then after that...
But they were not around when the Spanish flu happened. How would they recall?
Based on documented information.
So how would they do it? How do we call that?
Research.
Research, search for information. It's also a critical thinking skill. You search for the appropriate information. Well, Spanish flu happened in 1919, thereabouts. Unless you are an ancestor, you were not wounded. Yes, eh?
Yes, but here, one assumption you are telling, use COVID pandemic as a guide. Yeah. So you are assuming that I know what is done. So I have to make sure what is done in reference during the company to be able to put the elements I need to look. Because the COVID came in this era, as you just mentioned. The spread of the Spanish flu was not as the COVID. COVID covered all over the world. Why? Because now people move easily. By that time it's restricted. Movement would be by boat. So before even it reaches other places, it may take time, or probably from the boat before it goes. So that's that aspect. And the other aspect is the information. Now we have our internet. Yeah. We have all the social media. At that time they didn't have it. It's just the newspapers and radio, if you are lucky.
Yeah.
And then the way it was spreading at that time, and as you just said, you didn't have industries interested in money there to say, oh, let's solve it as a vaccine, because they didn't get a vaccine there to solve it. How it disappeared, that's another story. If you don't have people to kill it, stop there. So we should know what is this. And now in our search, it's where we go point by point, how it happened, where it went, what are the solutions, and so on. The guidance would be knowing correctly what is COVID, what strategies have been put in place. Those strategies now will come into, is it the Ghanaian approach or the European approach, not the European, the American or so on, where we now can be doing the comparison and knowing where to look into and come to a solution.
Now my question then is, the actual question is, by doing that, what components of critical thinking skill will you be developing? They responded. Problem solving too will be there. Yes. That is good. So you realize that it is not just about having the question and students going through. We are able to develop these skills during the discussion stage. You saw A, B, C, D. So what is it? You own the information, and then you are able to develop the skill. Thank you. Then we want to move on to another strategy we call scenario analysis. Scenario analysis is very popular in the business and in the law. They always have some case they may want you to look at it. The business people do that. We can bring it up into our area, like the question I talked about. So in assessment, we talk about contextualizing questions. But if in teaching, you didn't bring scenarios, then in assessment, bringing them will become a little bit hard to the learner. So here we are looking at using interactive scenarios to support active learning strategies. You don't just teach, give the information, or they just search for the information, but you consciously let students place themselves in the shoes of professionals Some people call it problem-based learning. The scenario analysis mimics the problem-based learning. Just that in some of the scenario analysis, it could be theoretical. But problem-based learning, learners may have to go to the field and get out the information and what have you. So they work through storylines. It's not just A is B, no. You give them a case, then they break it down in order to answer the question. And this is where we can have complex problem, or as some tests will call it, ill-structured problem, where the final, in quotes, answer may differ, but they all solve the problem. So depending on the angle the learner will go and argue, the solution may be correct. So here, in fact, with the inquiry learning and scenario analysis and most of these critical thinking strategies like the debate and open-ended questions, the facilitator should be on top of issues. You should own the subject. You should be able to know the various angles learners can come from and still make cogent points or be right. Last week I saw a picture on social media where a maths teacher has set a question he himself is struggling to solve. You don't want that situation. So if you're on top of the issue, you know the angles learners can come from so that you don't misjudge them. So here, learners will apply what the knowledge they have into the real world context. So this is the important part. They act as if they are professionals. And as I said earlier, the question is non-linear. So students can have divergent views, and they will all be appropriate. So this one is in the sciences. You have an example there. You give a scenario. Maybe, do I have some chemistry people here? Or maybe you can take it from the legal point, I don't know. But when I was putting this question, I was thinking from the science background, where you can have various things done in order to arrive at a solution. So the question is, if two bodies are found dead, or two people are found dead in two different lakes, and then during the sending to the morgue, or at the morgue there is a mix-up, how will you determine which body came from which lake? And when we went to Takwa, this one was interesting. You know, UMAT, the science people, you do paper chromatography, you do this, Okay. Awesome. Do you get it? Do you get where he's coming from? So you have to get samples from the lake, see the components. What is the makeup of each lake? Is it possible that you find, let's say, some chemicals in lake A, in body B, but not in body A? Then you can make that linkage. So if students are thinking through and going through this process, would they not develop critical thinking skill? So you bring a scenario, they break it down. The topics, the content you teach, we can always get scenario. Even in grammar, we can get it. In communication, we can get it. Every area, you can get a scenario. You learners break it down. All that we are interested in is, would they be engaged? Would they be able to make that analysis? Would they move away from subjective thinking? Would they be objective? Would they be open-minded? Somebody will bring something up, and another group, we didn't think about that too. Okay, it's possible. So they will be switching from their initial position. And that is the essence of critical thinking. So these scenarios can help learners think through issues. And if you are doing this, learners cannot be passive. That is why I said that the key to all these critical thinking strategies is active learning. If learners are not active, if you don't provide opportunity the conducive classroom environment, and let me add the psychological safety for them to be active in your class, they cannot develop these skills. When we talk about psychological safety in education, we mean the ability of the learner to speak up without any fear. In some of us, when we enter class, even the adults see us and they are scared. Even when they want to greet you, it's like, good morning, sir. We've made ourselves but teachers, okay, when you look at the Latin background of teaching, they said that we stand in loco parentis. We are substitute parents. So they ought to be able to relate to you and with you as a parent. But some of us, as soon as they run away, that kind of stuff. We have to be open, create that environment where learners can contribute, share their views respectfully, without any fear, intimidation, or bullying. Sir, I think your hand is up. Yeah, you can go.
Yes. It's quite clear, the explanation you are giving about involvement and active learning and all that. But look at it practically in our current situations in various universities. You have 2,000 students in your class, or 1,500. At my time in Legon, we didn't even, the whole university was not up to 7,000, 2,000. So how do you apply what you are saying realistically with the numbers? If you are taking even 1 minute for each student, 2,000, 1 minute, 2,000 minutes, your class.
No. Some of them, okay,
I'm just,
I get your point.
the numbers are of serious concern. That's what, I don't know how you compromise, you deal with that.
So let me start with the initial one and I'll come to the 1 minute conversation. So there's a strategy we talk about, we call it flipped classroom. The COVID situation has opened up some strategies that were being done elsewhere that we were not doing. Now we do online teaching, is that not it? Good. Do we have LMS? Do we have any of the learning management system? I don't know what you use, but we do the Moodle. Do you use the Moodle? You don't? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Zoom and Google Meet, that's fine. But there is something we call flipped classroom. In flipped classroom, I'm jumping the gun, is there. What we do in flipping the classroom is that the actual teaching, if you like, will be done by the learner. So we give the information ahead of time to the learner. That's why I asked about the Moodle platform. If you have any learning management strategy system, you can put the material there, you can put the link there, you can put the book there, the section they have to read. So they do the reading, then they come to class. So if it's a scenario, you give them the scenario. This is the scenario we are going to discuss. Find out about blah, 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 blah. So when they come to the classroom, you are not going to start from A, B, C, D. No. You've given the scenario. Now you come to class and you discuss. So when you flip the classroom, it helps with the numbers. It's not everybody that will understand the content they have read. It's not everybody that will search for the information. You always have, as you were, stubborn students. But you get some of the students having access to the information and coming to class. And when they come to class, you can now then fine-tune the edges. So the scenario that you read, what are the issues you realize? Oh, sir, this was that was that. Okay, so with this, you have gone beyond A, B, C, D. You fine-tune the edge and that kind of stuff. So when you flip the classroom, it helps. Then we will talk about small group and discussion. Sometimes you can group the students, give them the assignment or the material or whatever it is, so that they will do it in groups. You come to class and you take it from there. When you have a large class and everybody is supposed to talk, it will take forever. That one I agree. But I realize that similar issues will be coming up. So those of us in qualitative research, we talk about data saturation. And when you see that the respondents, after 5 or 6 people, they are giving you the same thing, you don't continue. So unless there is a Tony issue, then you let it come up. So I agree that the numbers now make some of these strategies difficult, but then there are other ways we can go around them now and then. But it won't be perfect. But if we start, learners will catch up with us. Especially if there's the first time they are meeting you, and you start with flipping the class, you get to those that will still not. They say, we closed and you are doing this and whatever. But sometimes what I do is, UCC now, the timetable, Dr. Abaji is part of the timetable committee. I don't know why they did that, but it's helping me. For 3 credit hours, they don't put them together. They do 2 and 1. So for the 1, I let them take that as my flipping the class. You use that to read the material, look at the questions. When we meet at the 2-hour session, we go through, we fine-tune the edges, and then we move on. And that has been helping with my class. They are not up to 1,000 anyway. They are about 150 or so. But it has been helpful. And the students have enjoyed it. I don't know. Yes, sir.
The problem is still there. So probably it's time to think of strategies. Now, I'm just commenting on a comment where you said a group of people give the same responses, right? And I guess for me, it's a problem of sampling. If you didn't know your population, how it's structured, you may take a group which do the same thing. You didn't do probably a stratification and so on. So knowledge of the population matters more, and not the sample size, but how the population is structured. So that will allow you to capture all the information you want in your sample. Yeah. So that's the comment I have on it.
It's back. Sometimes when you do online meeting, you can have only 15 students. But when you ask them questions, they behave as if their network is off. Have you not seen that? So this question, they won't mind you. But I'm conscious, what I've been doing is as soon as you enter my Zoom class, I ask you to change your name, your profile name. You see, some people use iPhone. I will ask you to change it to your name. Yes. Yes. Okay, so if you use like I want to call students. Yes. So somebody will enter the Zoom class 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. No. Change everybody. I take 5 minutes to make sure that all the participants in my class will have their names there. And when I put a question on the screen, I call. And these days, Zoom, sometimes the participants are arranged alphabetically. And I start. We start with Abby, and then we are coming down. And some of the questions, so by the time we get to C, we've answered the questions. Good. Next set of questions, we are starting from, and students talk. And sometimes I do breakout groups. You know, in Zoom, you can put students in groups. Yes. Zoom has it. Where's the IT man? It looks as if most people do. You do. Okay. So, yes. Good. You move around the groups. Awesome. The way some people are looking at me, they don't know that facility. So I charge the ICT one to take them through. Zoom has the ability to put the students in groups online. We call it breakout groups. It's simple. Yeah, it's split. Yeah. Randomly done. And then you can be moving around. You can enter this group, participate in their discussion, move to another group. It's there. And I do that. So students are there, then I group them automatically. Sometimes the system will look at it, groups of 6, 4, 10, 12, depending on the number. And you group them. So the question is there. Everybody can see the question on the screen, even as I've shared the screen. But they are in groups. They are all online. But if you are not within the group, you won't hear what somebody is talking about. Yeah, the white one is wonderful. So I'll be moving around the groups. I'll enter. And as a teacher, I say, we are doing this, and I say, okay, that is good. I think we are on course. Then I move until I monitor all that, and then we can come back as a whole, one unified group. And it's helpful. So that one, if you are online, it doesn't matter the number. You can get groups of 10. If you are 1,000, 100, 10 groups, and you'll be monitoring. If you are 1,000, 20 in the group, you enter, you discuss, you come back, and then you